Hey, it's Renmar, and welcome back to another episode of MPL Soundcheck, a weekly show where we talk about the latest happenings and news in MDL and MPL Philippines. First off, I just want to say thank you for your patience. I posted last week on the YouTube page that we wouldn't be posting anything for a week, but that's done. It's already a new week, and we are back. Also, I do understand that it is a Tuesday by the time I posted this, so we're a day late with Soundcheck. I'm sorry, but it took me a while to prepare and actually think about what to talk about for Soundcheck, because I didn't want this to just be a recap. Since we are now already halfway through the season of MPL Philippines, there are some specific things I want to talk about and use this episode as more of like a nostalgia trip, a look back to the first 4 weeks of the season and the stories of our top 4 teams. Now, before anything else, as usual, MPL Soundcheck is meant to be an auditory experience. So please feel free to put me in another tab, minimize the window while you're doing other things. While you're working, maybe just relaxing, trying to get through the day or road trip, whatever. That's the experience of Soundcheck. But if it feels like there's something on the screen that I'm talking about and you'd want to see it, go ahead, bring it up. But I'll do my best to be as descriptive as possible so you can just imagine it, so you don't have to bring up the video yet again. But it would be great if you wanted to. And also, since there's a lot I want to talk about, and I'm trying to avoid Soundcheck going past 30 minutes. Like, I want to make it even more short experience, maybe going for less than 25. We're not going to be talking about MDL Philippines this week. Next week, though, we're going to be talking more about MDL since, if I'm not mistaken, by next week, it will already be the last week of the group stages in MDL Philippines. Like, right now, we are in week 5. MDL PH is only 6 weeks. So by next week, their group stage is done, and then we'll just have to wait for their playoffs. So now, let's talk about MPL Philippines. Halfway through the season, and as the standings are now on your screen, it's pretty crazy. NXPE, Omega, Onyx, TNC are taking up the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th slot respectively. And they are struggling. However, what I like about our struggling teams this season is that they have really shown flashes of brilliance and potential that they will eventually find the right mix, the right performance to just turn things around and make it favorable for them. And I still strongly believe that. And actually, I'm rooting for them to start racking up more wins, more upset wins, because then that would mean our season would get even more unpredictable. And it has already been unpredictable because of what happened in week number 4. But leading up to week number 4, the season, especially our meta and the heroes being picked, have been predictable. Although there have been some surprises here and there, talking about the Zilong Gold Lane pick of TNC, of course, Julian and Glue making it into the mid lane, Arlot also now being available and affecting the meta. It wasn't until the last week of the season where we were all really just like, wow, what can we expect now in MPL Philippines Season 11? Because let's talk about who's at the top right now. Brent Esports. They were swept by Echo in week 1, but then they proceeded to sweep everyone else. They ended the first half of the season with a 6-series sweep streak when they did their player victory walk at the end of their series for week 4. Master Ogren had a broom with him. Just to show that, right now they aren't just on a win streak, they are on a sweep streak. Blacklist International, they were swept by Echo, they swept by TNC, they swept Omega, 1-1 against Onyx. They were swept by RSG and Bren before they swept NXPE in their last match for the first half. They are currently 4th in the standings. Before RSG PH, Echo were undefeated in series, but they dropped games against Onyx and Omega. And then, of course, for RSG PH, sitting at 3rd, they swept Onyx, they swept Omega. They swept Onyx, they were swept by Omega. They swept TNC, but then they were swept by Bren. They swept Blacklist, they won 2-1 against NXP, and now they swept Echo. So they ended their first half of the season with a 3-series win streak. Now, I wanted to lay down the stories of how the top four teams got here, along with a little bit of the teams in the lower portion of our bracket. Because I want to spend this episode talking about the top four teams and then their strengths. And then we're going to transition that later on into a topic that I think you'll see weaved very well into it, hopefully. So looking at the standings, of course, Bren is at top with 18 points, Echo at 16, RSG at 14, Blacklist with 11. And so I want to start off with talking about Bren Esports and what I believe are their best strengths. Now, for me, they're drafting and each player fully understanding their assignments each game along with their conditions is their set of best strengths. Because they understand the individual conditions of their hero so well, of their draft so well, they get to translate that easily into group play. It also doesn't hurt that Ogwen is having an all-star season. He is currently atop with MVP honors with 8. At this point last season, I believe the most MVPs anyone got halfway through was at around 4 or 5. So Ogwen is almost like double compared to what the most MVPs were acquired by a player at this point of last season. Actually, let's quickly visit that. Ogwen's at 8. And then at second place, you got Kelro with 6 MVP performances under his bag. And then after that, it's a tie between Carl TZ and Oh My Venus at third with 4 MVP counts each. But my goodness, Ogwen is on fire this season. And to continue about Bren Esports, I had the tremendous privilege of being able to listen in on the team comms of some teams thanks to our prod team. One of the teams I got to listen to during the draft, play their game, was Bren, and my goodness, it doesn't translate. And by that, I mean the Bren shot calls are very simple and efficient, yet their in-game movements look so complex and artistic. And I believe that's a perfect example of what I mentioned about them. Each player of Bren Esports always understanding their assignments each game along with their conditions. Have that hammered in. Your shot calls can be simple and efficient, but then it translates into beautiful MLBB individually and as a team that looks so complex, intricate, and dare I say, artistic. To add to that, just also want to add, Few is a freaking legend. He is an absolute legend. I do not want to expound more on that without the risk of divulging anything, but Few, my goodness, an absolute legend. Okay? So along with talking about the team's strengths, I also want to suggest series to watch for each team or games. So for Bren Esports, my favorite series of theirs so far this season is Bren versus Blacklist International Week 4, Day 1. This was the series I got to hear the comms for. The series where Few played Julian in mid and Flap had Arlot with some beautiful setups. The series where Few had that Numenon Blast as a Valentina to win game number 2. I suggest you look at that series for Bren Esports. Now, since we talked about Bren versus Blacklist, of course, let's talk about Blacklist. Blacklist International, my favorite thing about them and their biggest strength for me is they're still one of the best teams in objective-centric gameplay. One of the best lore dances performed this season. Actually, in the cast, we ended up calling it a Lord musical because it was like a 3 to 5 minute Lord dance. Early on in the game, that was the first Lord. One of the best ones is no doubt Blacklist's Lord dance to turn the game around against a snowballed Omega lineup in week 2, day number 2, game number 1. So Blacklist versus Omega, week 2, day 2, game number 1. All the best qualities we've known Blacklist to have, they're still there. With new players in Yue, Super Red, and from time to time Renegade filling in important roles, it's understandable that it will take time for the team to fully gel together. But 11 points and 4th in the standings is super respectable. Now, my favorite series so far this season of Blacklist International is not actually that Omega series they had, but the series they had against Onyx PH. So that's Blacklist International versus Onyx Week 3, Day 1. This was the series wherein in game number 3, Oh My Venus secured that awesome 5-man pull as Faramis. And the series where game number 2 was a tough contest, but the veterancy and calm of Blacklist International showed. And mind you, this was a series where they were coming off of a game 1 loss. They had to reverse sweep Onyx PH to win that series. So far for me, my favorite series of Blacklist International is Blacklist International versus Onyx from week 3, day 1, where you can really see the best qualities we've known Blacklist always have, plus some new qualities as well coming in, of course, with UN, Super Red playing new roles to the team. It really showed in that series. Now for the defending world champs, Echo. Well, now what I mentioned as the best qualities for Bren also apply for Echo. My favorite quality of theirs is also a double-edged sword, and it's their lack of hesitation. If it's commit, they commit. They do not give up on the idea of making sure that they get something out of anything in game. Their series against RSG PH may have exposed some gaps in their armor, but they are still a team to watch out for. My favorite series so far this season for Echo is, of course, my goodness, Echo versus Omega Week 4, Day number 1. Such a good series, not just for Echo, but against an Omega squad where Kelro was absolutely playing out of his mind and Echo were challenged, so Echo really needed to bring out their best form to get through Omega. The double-edged sword that is Echo's lack of hesitation and eagerness to commit is in great display here, along with their heart of a champion, unwillingness to give up, their individual skill. It was a beautiful series for both teams, and I highly suggest that you watch it. Now, I'm sure with all the teams that we've talked about so far, and along with, of course, knowing that we're going to be talking about RSG PH next, this is a great time to remind you that the top 4 of the league so far in MPL Philippines are, number 1, the SEA Games roster that we're going to field in Cambodia. So, that's in Cambodia, right? Yeah, I believe it's Cambodia. So, that's Bren Esports. The defending MPL Philippines champions, Blacklist International. The world champions, recently crowned, Echo. And of course, the Kings of the Sea, the team looking to make it back to MSC so that they can defend their crown, RSG Slate Philippines. Now, up until week 4, I didn't know what to feel about RSG PH because of their inconsistency. Win, loss, win, loss, win. Either sweep or get swept. One day, they're showing off the best qualities that made them who they are. The next, throw it out the window and they're incredibly sloppy. But in week 3, day 3, when they faced Blacklist International, that felt like a turnaround. It was, out of all the series they played before that day, the series where it felt like I was watching the RSG of old again. The Pandamentals in full force. A young star jungler popping off in game 1 with H2's MVP Hayabusa. Light being light with set after set of destruction in game number 2. It was a glimpse of what was to come for them in week 4. Then they faced NXPE and it almost went wrong, but they were still looking stronger than they have ever been. After that series, Coach Panda said he would give the team a talking to because in his eyes, the game could have been much more one-sided in the series, if they kept the series cleaner in terms of their performance in game, their execution, respecting the conditions of the opposing team and what you need to do to end it so that they don't get to find a way to turn it around. And then, after that, RSG PH versus Echo happened in the series that I believe has the biggest championship implication so far this season. And yeah, I know it's only halfway through the season, but let me explain why. What made RSG PH so dominant in Season 9 and MSC were mainly 2 things. 1, their near-perfect drafting each game, tailored for each opponent to maximize their weaknesses as much as they can. Sometimes, even forgoing the idea of what is meta just to take away comfort picks from the enemy because they've prepared a strategy to counter whatever meta pick they leave open. Go back to MPL Philippines Season 9 and MSC 2022. I believe during that run of RSG dominance, we were just continuously harping on about their great drafting almost each game, almost each series. And of course, their textbook pandamental in-game execution. A mix of amazing Lord team fighting or objective team fighting, but with enough room for improvisation to get pickoffs and skirmish wins before objective fights. It was around that time of dominance for RSG where Light made a name for himself as a shadow in the bushes you needed to watch out for, because he loved to set up teams from very off angles. He would somehow find a way to make it behind enemy lines even though you don't expect him to. The RSG PH we saw against Echo is the closest they have ever been to their dominating MSC form and MPL Philippines Season 9 form. But I hope it isn't their peak, because them doing what they did to Echo, performing like that each series, I'm sure will light a fire under the teams to step up their game even more, replicate some of their fundamentals and principles in drafting and in gameplay, replicate their style, but also make it their own, you know? To get a full appreciation for RSG slate, I would recommend watching their last 3 series, because you get to really see their road of growth. That is RSG versus Blacklist, NXPE, and then Echo. Now, I wanted to end this portion to talk with a talk about RSG PH, because again, because of what they did in the draft and in the game against Echo, I feel like teams will look at that series and think, okay, yeah, we need to shake things up with the draft. Because let's talk about the drafts so far this season and tendencies. Now, I don't want to go in depth about this because I actually plan to make an even more detailed video about the current Philippine meta as based off of MPL Philippines Season 11. But I just really wanted to talk about it now. I couldn't help myself. So, one thing very clear about our meta is we have a preference over, of course, these heroes. In terms of most banned, of course, you have Joy and 1-1. If either of these are open, they get picked up right away. The 2 times 1-1 was picked up by Bren, it won. 1-1. No, 2-0, but it 1-1-1. Yeah. And now, I'm going to mention some heroes here, and I'm pretty sure when I mention them, you can imagine drafts already going in your head. Other than Joy and 1-1, Fredrin, most picked blue side, first picked overall, 28 games. Kaja, Valentina, Faramis, Glue, Farsa, Kadita, Diggy, Melissa, Lapu, Fanny, Yuzhong, Cho, Claude, Brody, Ruby. See, I'm just mentioning those, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's gotten to the point where it's not just us, like even the audience like understands like what picks go where. That has been like the meta of it all. Expect a mid laner to get picked in the first phase, because out of the 124 games played by mid laners, 102 of those games they were picked in the first phase. Everyone else is still pretty shuffled, although Rome has a slight tendency to be picked in the second phase with certain Rome picks. Usually I imagine those are picks like Kufra, Atlas getting picked in the second phase. Ruby I know gets picked a lot in the second phase. Lolita as well. Sometimes red side third pick depending on who, but usually that's a marksman. See, I'm sure as I talk about this, you can already imagine in your head like, oh wait, yeah, going back, that's how the drafts are like. But because of how RSG Slate drafted against Echo, man, I have to bring up the drafts again. Good thing I take notes of these. Game number 1, their bans were Cho, Akai, and Yuzhong. Targeted for Yaoi. It's like what teams do to Blacklist International, instantly banning out the Diggy Faramis or Diggy Estes. They're even willing to give the Estes now. And then you ban something else. They banned the Cho, the Akai, the Yuzhong. They banned the Akai not only because it's a Yaoi pick, but it's also mainly a Carl Tizzy jungle pick. So they targeted Yaoi / Carl Tizzy and then an XP laner that Sanford plays incredibly well. They take out the Yuzhong. They first picked the Fredrin that was open because if you're Echo, of course you'd want to ban 1-1, Joy, and Valentina. Okay. So then the picks for RSG were Fredrin and then Melissa Lolita because Echo prioritized Faramis Kaja and then Paquito for Naths in the XP lane. The previous times you saw I play this season was, I believe, only in the jungle, and that was Kyle Tizzy, if I'm not mistaken. And then Eve, who has also fallen out, although I feel like she should really be able to get picked out more. And then Echo drafted Faramis, Kaja, Claude, Benedetta, Barretts. On paper, yeah, that Echo lineup will struggle. In practice, they really struggled. Even though Echo were able to get some objectives, RSG were always there to counterpunish. It's hard to escape the grasp of a Lolito and even a late entry Paquito along with a Melissa you couldn't even get, even if you'd be able to take down the Fredrin. That's what happened. Game number 2, one of the best draft sequences I've seen this season. Akai Yuzhong Cho banned again. This time Echo didn't want to give the Fredrin, so RSG take the Valentina. They also didn't want to give the Joy because it's a flex pick. Not only is it a pick in the XP lane for Naths, it can also be a pick in the mid lane for Exort, who has a win with a mid lane Joy. Valentina, Brody, and then Lancelot. A Tanksalot at that. Last 2 picks, Franco and Lapu-Lapu, because Echo drafted Melissa, Kaja. So rush to Melissa, get the Farsa. Yeah, I will be forced to get the Atlas, but you're up against a Valentina. And then Sanford picked the Masha because instead of single target control, your control is single target burst and peel. That's what Echo needed, an XP lane at that. But because they were up against Valentina, it was hard. They almost turned the game around, forced a game number 3 after a defense. They pushed down mid. But then the Tanksalot came in, found Benny, bursted him down. Eman was threatening a bottom side split push end a la Echo against Echo. And so the rest of Echo were forced back. They couldn't defend anymore after that. Whew. Mind-blowing drafting. And that's why I'm so excited for the second half of the season. And I really hope teams took notes. Not only, of course, from RSG and Echo, but from each other. Again, all the teams so far, even those who are struggling, have shown flashes of brilliance and principle so unique to them that I feel like the others would need to try and mimic but also apply to themselves, man. And I believe that's how we're going to see the Philippine meta evolve. If the first 4 weeks, up until, well, let's say the last day, was trying to set a nice foundation for yourself, and then you'll go experimenting, I feel like that's going to change. I feel like especially for the top 4 teams, they have a solid foundation. And then as we go on, we're going to see some newer showings. Because heck, even Edward had a really great Arlot strategy. He gave it Unbending Will and then built it tank items, changing it depending on the situation. Sometimes he would prioritize Dominance Eyes. He would always prioritize Hunter's Fury and then change up the boots, either Warrior or Tough, depending on who he's up against. And then either prioritize Dominance Eyes, Radiant Armor, and then later on he'd go Brute Force Breastplate, things like that. Those are the levels of creativity we're talking about in terms of what I feel like we can hope to see from all of the teams, even more so. They've shown that. They've shown their foundations. They've shown their principles and fundamentals. Time to layer onto that, Add some new levels to this house or cake that you're building. We always make food references in the English stream, so let's go with food references. And that makes me so much more excited for the second half. I love not only what the top 4 teams, but all the teams in MPL Philippines Season 11 so far have shown. And I'm excited to see where they're going to go moving forward for the last 4 weeks of the regular season. that is it for this episode of MPL Soundcheck. Comment down below some of the best things that you've seen this season, what stuck with you, and of course, don't forget to like the video, share it, and subscribe to our channel as well. Thank you for your patience for the week off that I had, but we are back. More videos are going to be coming up, a more detailed discussion of the Philippine meta in another video, and another video where it'll just be a compilation type of, well, just watch out for that. All right. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.